The lunch rush was in full swing, and the restaurant was alive with the sound of clinking glasses, soft background music, and the low murmur of conversation. The smell of freshly baked bread and grilled meat filled the air, making the atmosphere warm and inviting for most guests. But there was one table near the large front window that had a different energy entirely. It was table 7, and everyone on staff knew it well. The moment the host seated a certain man there, a wave of tension rippled through the restaurant staff. The man was in his mid-50s, with perfectly combed gray hair, a sharp suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, and a golden watch that caught the light every time he moved his hand. He looked like the kind of man who expected the world to bend for him. His expensive shoes tapped impatiently against the floor, and his eyes darted around the restaurant as if looking for something to criticize. This was not the first time he had been here. In fact, he was a regular, and his visits were never peaceful. He had a reputation among the staff, a reputation that made even the most experienced waiters nervous. He was known for sending dishes back again and again, for complaining about the tiniest details, for talking down to the staff as if they were beneath him, and for leaving without leaving a single tip. It wasn't that he was always loud or openly angry. Sometimes he could deliver an insult with a smile, but somehow that made it even worse. It was the way he could make someone feel small without raising his voice. And when he did raise his voice, it felt like the whole restaurant froze. Today was no different. He had barely been seated for 5 minutes before the trouble began. The first waiter approached politely to ask for his order, but came back looking pale, muttering something about impossible demands. Another tried, hoping maybe this time would be different, but within moments they were sent away, shaking their head and pretending to have another task. Nobody wanted to be near table 7. The man's complaints started with the menu, too limited. According to him, then the water not cold enough, he said, tapping his glass like it was an emergency. The kitchen staff had already heard about his arrival. They groaned, knowing he would likely send food back, no matter how perfect it was. Out on the floor, the waiters exchanged glances, silently deciding who would be the unlucky one to face him next. Some busied themselves with cleaning tables that didn't really need cleaning. Others took extra time chatting politely with easier customers, anything to avoid being caught in his glare. Meanwhile, the man continued to look around with that same air of superiority, his fingers once at a passing busboy, just to ask for a napkin. The boy, startled, rushed to get it and nearly tripped on his way back. The man smirked, clearly enjoying the discomfort he caused. It was almost as if this was a game to him. See how far he could push the staff before they broke. At the far end of the restaurant, a new waitress named Maya watched quietly. She had only been working here for 2 weeks and was still learning the rhythm of the place. She had heard whispers about a nightmare customer but hadn't met him yet. Now, seeing the way the other staff avoided table 7, she began to understand. But there was something in her expression that was different from the others. She didn't look scared, she didn't roll her eyes or whisper angrily under her breath. Instead, she simply watched, her posture straight, her eyes steady. Maya noticed the way his tone shifted depending on who approached. He seemed to enjoy making the younger waiters flustered, and he was sharper with those who showed fear. She could see the pattern, and it made her jaw tighten. She had worked in other restaurants before. She knew the type people who used their wealth as a shield, thinking it gave them the right to treat others badly. She also knew that fear only fed their ego. As she stood there, the manager tried to send one of the senior staff to handle him. The older waiter sighed and reluctantly went over, but before long he returned to the counter, muttering something about the wine being too warm and refusing to go back. Maya realized that the man had successfully driven off 3 different waiters in under 15 minutes, and the lunch rush was getting busier. meaning it was only a matter of time before someone had to face him again. From across the room, Maya could hear the man's voice, loud enough for nearby tables to notice. He was complaining about the way the bread was sliced, about how the butter was too hard to spread, about how a place like this should know better. His words carried an arrogant confidence, as if he believed everyone should be grateful just for his presence. Several diners glanced over uncomfortably, sensing the tension, but nobody said a word. The situation was becoming a shadow over the entire restaurant. Customers at nearby tables were eating faster, glancing toward the door as if considering leaving. Early, the atmosphere that had been warm and welcoming now felt tight and uneasy. Even the music seemed quieter, as if it didn't want to be heard over him in that moment. Maya felt a decision forming inside her. She was still the newest member of the team, and she knew it wasn't her job to handle the most difficult customer in the building. But she also knew she couldn't just stand there watching her coworkers shrink away. She took in a slow breath, set her tray down on the counter, and prepared herself for what she knew would be a very uncomfortable few minutes somewhere deep down. She sensed that this moment might define how the rest of her time at this restaurant would go. The other waiters noticed her movement and gave her questioning looks, as if to say, "Are you sure?" She simply nodded, not out of arrogance, but out of a calm certainty that someone had to step forward, and if nobody else would, it might as well be her. Maya stood still for a moment, holding her serving pad in one hand and breathing slowly. The noise of the restaurant felt distant to her now, as if her focus had narrowed to a single table, the one where the rich man sat, tapping his fingers on. The polished wood, she could see the amused look on his face, the way his eyes followed the staff like a predator watching nervous prey. She had seen that look before in other places, other jobs, and it had always been the same. It was the look of someone who thought they owned the room. She adjusted her apron and started walking toward him, her steps steady and measured. She didn't rush, didn't hesitate, and didn't look away as she moved across the floor. She felt the eyes of her coworkers following her. Some of them looked worried, others curious, and a few even shook their heads slightly, warning her without words. But Maya didn't stop. She had made up her mind. And when she made up her mind about something, she rarely changed it. The man saw her coming and leaned back in his chair. He picked up his glass of water and swirled it lazily, his lips curling into a half-smile. It was the kind of smile that said he was already planning to make this interaction difficult. Maya could almost hear the challenge in it. But she kept her own expression calm. When she reached the table, she greeted him politely. "Good afternoon. Sir, my name is Maya. I'll be taking care of your order today." Her voice was warm but clear, not overly sweet or apologetic. The man raised an eyebrow, his gaze scanning her from head to toe. Finally, he said, "I was wondering if anyone here was actually interested in doing their job." Maya didn't flinch. She nodded slightly and asked, "What would you like to order today?" The man smirked, clearly expecting her to stumble or over-apologize. Instead, she stood waiting, her pen ready. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "First of all, this water is warm. I want it replaced with something colder, and make sure the ice is fresh, not the cloudy kind you've been giving me before." She wrote down the request without comment. "Of course, sir. I'll make sure the ice is fresh," she replied. Her tone didn't carry any sarcasm, but it also didn't show fear. This seemed to bother him in a way he didn't expect. He frowned slightly before continuing. "Now, the bread, the crust last time was too hard. I nearly cracked a tooth. I want it soft, warm, and served with butter that spreads easily. Not frozen solid like you people usually bring." Maya listened patiently, nodding once more. "I'll ask the kitchen to prepare it exactly as you like," she said. She met his eyes as she spoke, not aggressively, but as if to say she heard him clearly and would take care of it. The man paused, clearly waiting for her to make some mistake. When she didn't, he leaned back again, and the soup? Last time, it was too salty. Before you even think of bringing it to me, make sure it's done right. I have very particular tastes, and I won't settle for less than perfect. His voice was slightly louder now, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. A couple of diners glanced over. Sensing the tension building, Maya, however, didn't let his raised tone push her into nervousness. She calmly replied, "I'll speak to the chef personally about the soup. Sir, I'll make sure it's exactly how you like it." Her steady, even voice seemed to unsettle him more than an argument would have. It was as if he couldn't figure out why she wasn't breaking under the pressure he was trying to create. He set his glass down with a small clink. "Humph, we'll see," he muttered. His eyes narrowed slightly as if studying her, but there was a flicker of curiosity there now. She had not apologized unnecessarily. She had not tripped over her words. And she had not avoided eye contact. This was not how his interactions with waitstaff usually went. Maya gave a small, polite smile. "I'll get your water right away," she said, and turned to walk toward the service counter as she passed. The other staff, they looked at her as if she were walking a tightrope. The busboy whispered, "Is he giving you a hard time?" She just shook her head lightly and said, "I've got it, in the kitchen." She gave the requests to the chef, explaining exactly how the bread and soup should be prepared. The chef glanced at her, then at the ticket, and smirked. "You're brave," he said. "Most people refuse to even take his order." She just shrugged. "He's a customer. We serve customers. It's that simple." When she returned with the cold water and fresh ice, she set it down in front of him gently. "Here you are, sir. Fresh ice, cold water," she said. The man lifted the glass, took a slow sip, and set it back down. "Better," he said, as if granting approval. Maya nodded once more. Not overreacting to the small praise, instead of leaving right away, she stood there for a moment and asked, "Would you like me to bring your bread now, or after the soup?" It was a simple question, but it was asked in a way that made it clear she was running the interaction, not just reacting to his every mood. He raised an eyebrow again, then said, "Bread first, I suppose." She nodded, "I'll be right back," and walked away. Her steps were calm and unhurried. She wasn't going to let him rush her. She had dealt with difficult people before, and she knew that giving them control over your pace was the first mistake. Back at the counter, a few waiters whispered about how she had lasted longer than most. "She hasn't come back angry or upset," one said. "Maybe he'll actually eat without sending everything back," another replied. But Maya wasn't thinking about whether she would win or lose this interaction. She was simply doing her job with the same respect she would give any other customer. The difference was that she refused to let his attitude decide how she would feel. What Maya didn't know yet was that this quiet strength, this calm way of standing her ground, was already starting to change the dynamic at table 7. The man might not have realized it, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't the one in full control of the game. The restaurant was busier now, every table filled, and the sound of conversation mixed with the soft clinking of silverware. But even in the middle of the lunch rush, table 7 still felt like its own stage. The man sat there like a king on his throne, scanning the room as if he were inspecting his subjects. His elbows rested on the table, and his fingers tapped slowly against his glass. The air around him was still heavy with that same tension. But something had shifted. The staff wasn't rushing to avoid him anymore. They were watching. Curious, because Maya was still handling him without showing any sign of fear. Maya walked back from the kitchen carrying a small basket of bread, steam rising from the soft rolls. She placed it gently on the table in front of him. "Here's your bread, sir, fresh from the oven, and the butter is soft as you requested," she said. Her voice was the same as before, calm and respectful. The man leaned forward, took a piece of bread, and pressed it lightly between his fingers. He muttered. "This is better than last time." He glanced up at her, waiting for her to show relief or gratitude for his rare compliment, but she only gave a small nod. "I'm glad it's to your liking," and stood ready to take the rest of his order as she wrote down the details for his soup and main dish. Another waiter passed behind her, whispering a quick, careful, before moving on. It was almost like the staff had turned this into a spectator sport. Everyone wanted to see how long she could keep him from exploding. A few minutes later, she returned with the soup, carefully placing the bowl in front of him. The rich smell of herbs and vegetables filled the air. He lifted his spoon slowly, as if preparing for disappointment, tasted it, and then frowned. "This is different," he said. Maya kept her eyes on him. "It's been adjusted as per your request. Less salt," she explained. The man took another spoonful and then looked at her strangely. "You actually listened." There was a pause, the kind of pause where most waiters would rush to say something to fill the silence. But Maya didn't speak. She simply nodded again, letting him sit with that thought. The truth was, she had listened, but not because she was afraid of his anger. She listened because that's what a good server does. And she wanted him to see that there was nothing extraordinary about it. It was just basic respect given equally to all customers. Meanwhile, at the counter, the manager watched with interest. Normally, by this stage, the man would have sent the soup back at least once. But it hadn't happened yet. The kitchen staff peeked out from the swinging doors. Quietly amused, one of them whispered, "I think she's actually taming him." The man continued eating the soup. But Maya could tell he was still testing her. He tapped his spoon against the bowl and said, "You must be new here. I've never seen you before." She replied, "Yes, sir, I started 2 weeks ago." He smirked. "That explains the confidence. Give it a few months and this place will wear you down like it has the others." His tone was sharp, but there was something else in it, almost like a challenge, as if he wanted to see if she would agree. Maya didn't take the bait. "I believe people choose how they work, sir. The place doesn't change you unless you let it," she said simply. That answer seemed to make him pause for a second. Then he chuckled, a low, short sound, and went back to eating. The calm between them didn't last long, though. As soon as she returned with his main course, he began again. "This steak had better be cooked perfectly. Last time it was so overdone, I thought it was shoe leather." Maya set the plate down and replied evenly, "It's medium rare, exactly as you ordered. But if there's anything wrong, I'll have the chef correct it immediately." The man cut into the steak, inspected the pink center, and gave a single approving nod. "Not bad," he said, before taking a bite around them. Customers had started to notice that something unusual was happening. They could see that Maya wasn't shrinking under his sharp comments, and they could also see that he hadn't shouted or caused a real scene. Yet, a middle-aged couple at the next table smiled faintly, clearly rooting for her as she cleared his empty soup bowl. Maya caught the faintest shift in his posture. His shoulders seemed a little less stiff, his tone just a bit softer. She wondered if maybe, just maybe, he was starting to respect her in his own guarded way. But she didn't relax. She knew from experience that some people were like storms. They could calm for a while, but the wind could pick up again at any moment. And sure enough, it did. When she came to refill his water, he suddenly said, "Do you know how much I spend in this restaurant? Probably more than you make in a year." His words were meant to put her back in her place, to remind her of the difference in status. Maya didn't blink. "I'm sure you're a valued customer, sir. I treat every guest here with the same care, regardless of what they spend," she replied. The man stared at her for a long moment, his eyes searching her face for some sign of weakness, but he didn't find it. Slowly, a small, amused smile appeared. "Interesting," he said under his breath, almost as if he were speaking to himself. In the corner, the busboy whispered, To another waiter, she's not scared of him at all. And the other replied, yeah. But he's not angry either. That's the strange part. It was true. This was the longest any waiter had stayed with him without a shouting match. By the time the man finished his meal, there was an unspoken understanding between them. Maya didn't bow to his ego, and he didn't push her past the line of respect. The staff kept watching, wondering if the peace would hold until the end of the service. What nobody realized yet was that the real turning point was coming soon. Something would happen in the next part of this encounter that would make even the rich man himself rethink how he treated people. And Maya was ready for it, even if she didn't know exactly what it would be. Maya returned to the table, carrying a small tray with a clean napkin and a refill of his drink. The man looked up as she approached, his expression unreadable. She placed the drink down in front of him with the same steady hands she had kept. Since the beginning, there was no trembling, no rushed movements, he noticed. Though he didn't say anything at first, instead, he leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. Watching her closely, as if trying to figure her out, she could feel his eyes on her, but she didn't let it bother her. "Is there anything else you'd like, sir?" she asked. Her tone was calm, polite, but not overly sweet. He tapped his fingers on the table. A slow rhythm. "You really don't seem afraid of me," he said suddenly. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. The way he said it felt less like a statement and more like a question. Maya met his gaze without flinching. "I'm here to do my job, sir. That's all," she replied. He tilted his head slightly, as if the answer amused him. "Most of your coworkers can't even stand near my table without sweating," he said, "yet here you are, standing like you own the place." She allowed a small smile. "I don't own it, but I respect myself enough to stand tall." That seemed to catch him off guard. His smirk faded for just a moment before returning. "Confidence, I see," he muttered. He picked up his knife and fork again, cutting into the steak. The sound of the blade against the plate was sharp, but he didn't complain this time. Instead, he took a bite, chewed slowly, and then set his utensils down. "It's cooked perfectly," he admitted. Maya simply nodded and said, "I'm glad it's to your taste." A few customers at nearby tables were watching without pretending. Otherwise now, they had seen how he treated other waiters earlier, and they were clearly impressed that Maya was handling him so well. Even the manager, who usually stayed in the back during such moments, had stepped onto the floor to keep an eye on the situation. The man seemed to notice all the eyes on him. His voice lowered slightly. "You know, you're making quite a scene." Maya raised an eyebrow. "I think you were making the scene before I came over." She replied. It was a gentle statement, not sharp enough to be disrespectful, but clear enough that he heard the truth in it. He laughed, a real laugh this time. Not the mocking chuckle he had used earlier. It was short but genuine, fair. "Enough," he said, picking up his fork again. Maya took that as her cue to check on another table. She didn't hover around him, which was another thing he wasn't used to. Instead of standing nearby waiting for his next demand, she gave him space, showing she trusted him to call her if needed. When she returned a few minutes later to ask if he wanted dessert, he shook his head. "Just the check," he said. Maya nodded and walked to the counter to prepare it. The other waiters glanced at her as she passed, one of them whispering, "You survived." She smiled faintly, but didn't reply. When she brought the check back to his table, he took it without looking at the total. He reached into his wallet, pulled out a few bills, and placed them inside. "The folder here," he said, sliding it back toward her. She picked it up and gave a polite, "Thank you, sir." Before she could walk away, he spoke again. "Do you know why I act the way I do?" The question caught her by surprise. She turned back toward him. "I couldn't say, sir," she replied honestly. He leaned back, studying her face. "Because most people let me," he said. "They flinch, they apologize too much. They let me control the whole interaction. But you didn't. Maya didn't know what to say to that, so she simply stood there, waiting. He went on. It's rare to meet someone who treats me like a person. Not a problem or a trophy customer. He gave a small nod, almost to himself. You did well today. The words weren't exactly warm, but coming from him, they felt heavier than they sounded. Maya gave a small nod in return. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that, she said. Then, without dragging the moment out, she turned to leave. As she walked back to the counter, she could feel the shift in the room. The tension that had hung in the air earlier was gone. The staff, the customers, everyone seemed more at ease. She placed the bill folder in the register and counted the cash. Noticing the tip he had left, it was far larger than anyone expected from him, especially considering his reputation. She didn't announce it, didn't hold it up for everyone to see. But the busboy caught a glimpse and his eyes widened. He's never left that much before. He whispered. Maya only replied, maybe today was different. Meanwhile, the man finished his drink, stood up, and walked toward the door. As he passed the counter, he gave Maya a single nod, one that seemed almost like respect. Then he left, the sound of the door closing behind him for the first time in a long while. Table 7 was just another empty table, and not a storm waiting to happen. The rest of the shift went smoothly, but the story of what had just happened began to spread among the staff. Some saw it as a victory, others just as a strange moment of change. But for Maya, it was simple. She had done her job and refused to let someone take her dignity away. And somehow, that had made all the difference. The next afternoon, the restaurant was calmer. The lunch rush had passed, and the staff were moving at an easier pace, wiping down tables and preparing for the evening crowd. Maya was polishing cutlery at the service counter when the door opened. The sound of it made her glance up, and there he was, the same rich man from the day before. His presence was like a sudden gust of wind, shifting the energy in the room. Some of the staff froze for a moment. Others quickly busied themselves, pretending not to notice him. Nobody had expected him to return so soon. He usually came once a week at most, but here he was, walking in with his same confident stride, wearing another expensive suit. The golden watch on his wrist caught the sunlight streaming through the front window. The host greeted him politely and asked where he'd like to sit. Without hesitation, he said, "Table 7. The host hesitated for just a second, knowing that table was tied to his reputation, but nodded and led him there. As he sat down, he scanned the room, and his eyes found Maya almost immediately. She didn't look away. She simply gave him a small nod of acknowledgement before returning to her task. Whispers spread among the staff. Do you think he's going to test her again? One waiter muttered, maybe yesterday was a one-time thing. Another replied, or maybe he's here to prove she just got lucky. Nobody knew, but all eyes were quietly waiting to see. A few minutes later, Maya approached his table with the same calm walk as before. Good afternoon, sir. Welcome back, she said. He leaned back in his chair, a faint smirk playing on his lips. I figured I'd see if yesterday was a fluke, he said. Maya replied without missing a beat. Then I'll do my best to give you the same service as before. She handed him the menu, but he didn't take it right away. Instead, he studied her for a long moment. You didn't lose any sleep over me, did you? He asked. Her expression didn't change. No, sir. I try not to carry work home with me. That made him chuckle. Smart answer, he said. Finally, he picked up the menu and began scanning it. As he ordered, she noticed something different. In his tone, it was still direct, still exact about what he wanted, but there was less of that edge meant to intimidate. He requested his water with fresh ice again, his bread soft and warm, and his steak exactly medium rare. She wrote it all down without fuss and went to the kitchen. In the kitchen, the chef raised an eyebrow when she read the ticket. So he's back already. He asked. Yes, Maya replied. Same order as yesterday. Let's give him the best. The chef smirked. You must have done something right. He didn't yell at anyone yet. Back on the floor. A few of the other waiters passed by table 7, expecting to hear the man complain about the wait or the noise. But instead, he sat quietly, watching the activity of the restaurant. Every so often, his eyes would wander back to Maya, almost as if he was still trying to figure her out. When she returned with his water, she set it down gently. Fresh ice, sir, she said. He took a sip, nodded, and said, Consistent. That's good. She smiled faintly. That's the goal. The bread came next. Warm and soft, just like before. He tested it the same way, pressing it lightly between his fingers before spreading the butter. This time, he didn't mutter about cracked teeth or frozen butter. He simply began eating. While he waited for the steak, Maya checked on other tables. Never rushing back to hover over him, he seemed to notice that too. Watching how she interacted with other customers, her patience and calm manner didn't change. From table to table, whether it was a family with children or a couple on a date, when the steak finally arrived, she placed it in front of him. Medium rare, sir. As requested, he cut into it slowly, inspecting the center, and then took a bite. This time, there was no dramatic pause. No sharp criticism. He simply ate, chewing thoughtfully. After a few bites, he set his fork down and said, It's perfect. It wasn't just the food. He knew it. She knew it. The whole atmosphere at the table felt different from yesterday. There was still a sense of formality between them, but it no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt more like two people keeping a mutual understanding halfway through the meal. He surprised her by asking, How long have you been in this line of work? She replied, About 5 years, sir. He nodded slowly. I can tell. You don't flinch easily. Maya just smiled. You meet a lot of personalities in this job, sir. You learn to adapt. He seemed to think about that for a moment before. Continuing to eat, when he was nearly done, he leaned back and said, Do you know why I keep coming back here, despite all the times I've been disappointed? She shook her head. No, sir, he replied, because this place has potential. But most people here don't push themselves. They accept mistakes as if they're normal. I can't stand that. Maya thought about his words. She could see how his demanding nature might come from wanting perfection, though it still didn't excuse his past rudeness. Still, it was the first time he had explained anything about himself. She nodded and said, I believe in doing things right, but also in treating people right, sir. He didn't answer right away, but there was a faint look of approval in his eyes. When the check came, he paid without looking at the total again and left another generous tip. Before leaving, he said, I'll be back next week. Make sure you're here. Maya gave a small nod. I'll be here, sir. As he walked out, the other staff gathered around her, whispering, What's going on? Is he nice to you? She shrugged. Maybe he's just realizing that respect goes both ways. It wasn't friendship. Not yet. But something was forming a shift in how he saw her, and maybe in how he saw the rest of the staff. Maya didn't know where it would lead, but she was ready to find out. The following week arrived quickly, and the staff were already talking about it in the back room. They knew the rich man would return. Just like he promised, some of them were nervous, others curious, and a few still couldn't believe how Maya had managed to deal with him twice without a single argument. It was just after midday when the familiar sound of the front door opened. And there he was again, dressed sharply as always. He walked inside with the same confident steps. But there was something different in his face this time. It wasn't the cold, calculating stare he had on his first visit. Instead, there was a faint trace of recognition, like he was looking for someone in particular. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on Maya. She was at another table, taking an order from a family. She noticed him too. and without missing a beat, she gave a polite nod before finishing with her current customers. The host asked where he wanted to sit, and, as expected, he replied, "Table 7." He sat down and adjusted his chair, glancing around at the busy restaurant. This time, he didn't snap his fingers or call anyone over. He simply waited. Maya approached him with the same steady walk she always used. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome back," she said. He smirked slightly. "You kept your word." She replied, "So did you." She handed him the menu. But before looking at it, he said, "I'll have the same as last time. You already know how I like it." She wrote the order down without needing to ask for details, of course. "Sir," and she headed for the kitchen. In the back, the chef raised his eyebrows. "He's not making any new demands." Maya shook her head. Not yet, when she returned with his water and fresh ice. He thanked her. The word "thank you" coming from him caught her attention. It wasn't overly warm, but it was genuine. She placed the breadbasket down, soft. And warm as always, he tore off a piece, spread the butter easily, and began eating without inspecting it like before. For the first few minutes, he ate in silence, watching the room as he had done before, but this time, instead of looking for things to criticize. He seemed more curious about the people. His eyes followed the servers moving between tables, the families laughing, the quiet conversations. Finally, he asked, "How long have you been in this city?" She was a little surprised by the question. "All my life, sir," she replied. "Why?" He shrugged, "Just wondering. You seem steady, like you've been through enough to know not to be shaken easily." Maya smiled faintly. "Maybe. Or maybe I've just learned that losing your temper doesn't solve anything." He smirked. "You think I lose my temper?" She gave him a knowing look. "I think you'd like to test people, sir, for a second." He looked like he might deny it, but then he chuckled. "Fair enough." The steak arrived, perfectly cooked again. He cut into it without ceremony and began eating. Between bites, he spoke, "You know, the first time I came here, years ago, I swore I'd never return. The food was average and the service was worse, but I came back anyway, because I wanted to see if things could change. Most people disappointed me, but you're different." Maya listened quietly. She didn't interrupt or rush him. He continued, "Most servers treat me either like a problem to avoid or like someone they have to please no matter what. You treat me like I'm just a person." His tone wasn't emotional, but it carried weight. It was the closest thing to a confession she had heard from him as he finished his meal. He leaned back in his chair. "You've made this place worth coming to again." Maya smiled softly. "I'm glad you feel that way, sir." For a moment, they just looked at each other. And it wasn't the cold stare from before. It was more like an understanding had been built between them. The check came, and once again, he paid without looking at the total. He left another generous tip, but this time, he didn't just hand it over and leave. Instead, he stood for a moment before walking toward the door. "Maya," he said. She looked up from the counter. "Yes, sir." He gave a small nod. "See you next week." After he left, the staff surrounded her. "What is going on with him?" one asked. "He's nice now." Maya just shrugged. "Maybe he's realizing he doesn't have to fight everyone." But inside, she knew it was more than that. He was changing, slowly, and maybe not for everyone. But at least with her, the rest of the day went on smoothly. But Maya kept thinking about their conversation. It wasn't just about serving food anymore. Something about her presence had made him drop his guard. Even if only a little, she didn't know what it meant yet, but she had a feeling that the next time he came, something important would happen. Something that might change how the entire staff, and maybe even the man himself, saw him forever. It was a Friday afternoon when the door to the restaurant swung open and the rich man walked in again. The staff noticed him immediately. But this time, there was no rush to avoid him. In fact, some of them even seemed curious to see what would Word had spread that he wasn't the same unbearable customer he used to be, and most of that change had started after he met Maya. He looked around the room until his eyes found her. She was carrying a tray of drinks to a nearby table. When she spotted him, she gave a small nod. He nodded back. A silent greeting that felt almost natural now. The host didn't even need to ask where he wanted to sit. "Table 7, he said, just like always. But there was no demand in his tone. It sounded more like a habit. Maya approached him with her usual calm steps. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome back," she said. "The usual order today." He gave a half smile. "You know me too well." She wrote it down and headed for the kitchen. The chef, hearing the order, smirked. He's predictable now. That's new. As the food was being prepared, the restaurant grew busier. A large group came in unexpectedly, and the staff were moving quickly to keep up. A waiter tripped slightly while carrying a tray past the man's table, and a glass of water spilled onto the edge of the table. The staff froze for a moment, expecting the man to explode the way he might have in the past, but instead, he simply pushed his chair back a little. "Careful," he said, his voice calm. The young waiter apologized nervously, but the man waved it off. "It's fine." That small moment did not go unnoticed. Maya returned with his bread and fresh water. She set it down and said quietly, "Thank you for being patient with him." He shrugged. Everyone makes mistakes. The words sounded so simple, but coming from him, they felt like a big change. When the steak arrived, Maya placed it in front of him, perfectly cooked as always. He cut into it, inspected the center, and nodded. "Still perfect?" She smiled faintly. "Consistency is the goal." He took a few bites in silence, then looked up at her. "You've changed the way I see this place." She tilted her head slightly, curious. "How so?" He leaned back in his chair. "Before, I came here expecting to be disappointed, and I made sure everyone knew it. But now, I actually look forward to coming here." There was a sincerity in his voice she hadn't heard before. It wasn't a compliment for the sake of politeness. It was genuine. Maya didn't make a big show of reacting, but she felt the weight of his words. "I'm glad," she said simply. He went back to eating, but every so often, his eyes wandered toward her as she worked, watching the way she moved from table to table, treating each guest the same way she treated him halfway through his meal. A woman from another table suddenly stood up and began raising her voice at a young waitress. She was upset about her food being late. The atmosphere in that corner of the restaurant grew tense, and several customers looked over. The young waitress looked flustered, apologizing over and over. Maya noticed and began walking toward them, but before she could get there, the rich man stood from his seat. He walked over to the upset woman and said in a calm but firm tone, "This is a busy time of day. The staff are doing their best. Give them a chance." The woman looked shocked, as did the young waitress. The man wasn't yelling, but there was something about his voice that made people listen. After a few moments, the woman sat back down, still muttering under her breath. But clearly less angry, the man returned to his table and continued eating as if nothing had happened. When Maya came to refill his water, she said quietly, "That was unexpected." He smirked. "What?" "I can't be the only one who stands up for the staff." She smiled. "It's just different, that's all." He gave a small shrug. "Maybe you were right. Respect goes both ways." By the time he finished his meal, the whole restaurant seemed to feel lighter. The staff no longer looked at him like a storm cloud waiting to break. Some even smiled as they passed his table when the check came. He paid it quickly and left another large tip. But this time, before leaving, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small business card. He slid it toward Maya. "If you ever decide you want to work somewhere else, call me." She looked at the card but didn't pick it up right away. "Thank you, sir, but I'm happy here." He nodded. "I thought you'd say that. As he left, there was no smirk, no cold glance back. Just a simple nod of respect. The staff watched him go, some of them still amazed at the change for Maya. It wasn't about turning him into a different man. Completely, it was about showing him that no matter how much money or power someone had, they still had to treat others like people. And somewhere along the way, he had started to believe it too. She went back to clearing his table. And for the first time since she had started working there, Table 7 felt like any other table. No fear, no tension, just another place for someone to enjoy their meal. And maybe, just maybe, it would stay that way. A few weeks passed, and by now, the rich man's visits had become a regular part of the restaurant's rhythm. Every Friday, just after midday, the door would open and he would walk in. Not with the heavy air of arrogance he once carried, but with a calm presence that no longer made the staff tense up. The other waiters had stopped avoiding Table 7, but out of habit, it was still Maya who served him each time. Neither of them had said it aloud, but they both knew that was how it was going to be. On one particular Friday, the restaurant was buzzing with more customers than usual. It was a holiday weekend, and families, couples, and groups of friends filled the place. The kitchen was running at full speed, and the floor staff moved quickly from one table to the next. The rich man entered as usual, and the host led him to his spot by the window. He took his seat, glanced around the busy room, and when his eyes found Maya, he gave her a small nod. She returned it before heading over. "Good afternoon, sir," the usual. She asked. He smiled faintly. "You already know." She wrote it down without needing to confirm the details. The kitchen staff had grown used to his order by now and immediately began preparing it the way he liked. While waiting for his meal, the man sipped his water and quietly observed the scene. He noticed the servers moving quickly, some of them newer and less experienced. He also noticed the occasional mistake, a plate going to the wrong table, a drink taking too long. Things that would have once set him off instantly. But now he simply sat back and let the room flow around him. Maya brought him his bread, fresh and warm as always, and as he broke it apart, he said, "You seem busier than usual today." She nodded. "It's a holiday, so more people are out. It's a little hectic, but we'll manage." He studied her face for a moment before saying, "You're good at this. You don't just take orders. You keep the room steady." She smiled. "It's part of the job, sir," as his steak was being prepared. Something happened across the room, at a table near the back. A customer began shouting at a young waiter for bringing the wrong side dish. The man's voice was sharp and loud, drawing the attention of nearby diners. The young waiter stammered, trying to explain, but the customer only got louder. The tension in that corner of the restaurant began to grow. Before Maya could even move toward the scene, the rich man stood up. He walked across the room with calm, deliberate steps, stopping beside the angry customer. His voice, when he spoke, was low but carried authority. "This young man is trying to help you. Shouting won't make your food come any faster." The angry customer looked startled. "Who are you to tell me?" But the rich man cut him off gently. "I'm someone who's been on both sides of this table, and trust me. Treating people with respect gets you better service." The room went quiet. The angry customer's face flushed, and after a tense pause, he muttered something under his breath and sat back down. The young waiter gave a quick, grateful nod before hurrying to correct the order. The rich man simply returned to his seat and resumed eating his bread, as if nothing had happened when Maya brought him his steak. She placed it in front of him and said quietly, "You didn't have to do that." He looked at her, a small glint of amusement in his eyes. "Maybe I did." She tilted her head. "Why?" He shrugged. "Because I've been that man, and I've learned it's not worth it." For a while, they didn't say much. He ate, she served other tables. But there was a quiet understanding between them. When the meal was done, Maya brought. The check, as usual, he paid without looking and left a tip. But this time, he also slid an envelope across the table toward her. "What's this?" she asked. He just said, "Open it later," and stood to leave. She thanked him and watched as he walked out. His pace was steady. And he gave a respectful nod to the staff as he passed, something he never would have done months ago after her. Shift ended. Maya sat down in the staff room and opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. The writing was neat, strong, and careful. It read, "Thank you for reminding me that respect is worth more than money. You changed the way I see people and myself." Along with the note was a gift card for a high-end store in town. Not as a bribe or payment, but as a gesture of gratitude. Maya smiled. Folding the note carefully and slipping it into her bag, it wasn't the value of the gift card that mattered. It was the fact that a man who once thrived on making others feel small had now taken the time to say thank you. The next Friday, when he came in, it felt different. There was no tension, no testing. Just two people greeting each other with mutual respect. And as Maya served him, she realized something important. She hadn't just tamed a difficult customer. She had helped someone change, not by fighting them, but by refusing to lose her own calm and dignity from that day on. Table 7 was no longer the dreaded spot in the restaurant. It became just another place for good food and conversation. The staff stopped whispering warnings, and new waiters never knew the man's old reputation unless someone told them. As for the man himself, he still liked his steak medium rare, his bread soft, and his water with fresh ice. But now, when he came in, he also brought something far more valuable: kindness. And all it took was one new waitress who believed that everyone, no matter who they were, should be treated with respect, and who believed just as strongly that respect must be returned.